Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for helping us kick off our speaker series for this year at the Center for Politics and Governance here at UT. My name is Ryan Streeter. I'm the Executive Director of the Center, and I'm glad to see all of you here today. I hope you'll come back. We've got a pretty nice lineup of speakers as part of our series this year. And so if you're not on our list, be sure to get on our list. You can do that by following the instructions on this card that's on your seat. It's got a list of upcoming talks and ways for you to stay plugged into what we're doing. It's my pleasure today to introduce Jason Fichtner to you. He has a great professional blend of academic and public service work. He has served as the Deputy Commissioner of the Social Security Administration in Washington, D.C., as well as the Chief Economist there, and the Chief Economist of the Joint Economic Committee in U.S. Congress. He's currently a Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, and is also an adjunct professor at Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, and Virginia Tech universities. He's a widely published author, and if you want to dig deeper into his world, I suggest you pick up his book, The Hidden Costs of Federal Tax Policy, is that right? Yeah. And the edited volume, The Economics of Medicaid. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jason to UT.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure to be here. What Ryan didn't mention to you is my undergraduate's University of Michigan. This is the closest thing I have to Texas burnt orange, so I hope it works. My master's is from Georgetown, and my doctorate's from Virginia Tech, and I'm teaching courses in economics for Johns Hopkins and Georgetown. And then my day job or full-time job is a senior research fellow at Mercatus, where I do research on Social Security, retirement savings issues, tax policy, and anything sort of budget and fiscal related. We are now in one of the most wonderful, fascinating times of a season. It's called the election season, or what people call in DC the silly season, because you have a lot of people talking about things they don't know about, or they're trying to convince you of something that's not the case. And I've always found that like the top 10 myths that are going on, or fact or fiction. And usually when you have these kind of things, there are pieces in there that are fact, there are pieces that are fiction, and the key is trying to figure out which ones are which and what does it mean for you. So part of this is a discussion of what are the top 10, or my top 10 myths about the economy and the budget, and what does it mean for you? And we'll have a little dialogue too, and we'll have some time for questions and answer at the end. But there's 10 things, and we'll start with the first one, which is the unemployment rate currently is 5.5%. So that means only 5 or 6 out of 100 people are unemployed. Does that sound like a good labor market to you? Yeah, it's pretty good. That's basically something that says if we have 5 or 6% unemployment, we should be having a fast economic growth. We should be having a lot of demand for labor. Wages should be rising because people are competing for jobs and employers want to hire more people. How does the economy feel to you now? Do you feel like it's a very strong economy? You're all kind of wishy-washy, not really quite sure. Why does this matter for you as students? Why are you coming to school? What do you want to get when you get out of here? A job. Yeah, a job. Just what you're coming to school for is to get a job. With an unemployment rate of 5 or 6%, your odds of getting a job are really good. But what's the rhetoric you're hearing now in the papers and in politicians? Is the economy roaring? Are students going to have an easy job market when they get out of school? No. So what's the fact, what's the fiction? It actually is 5.5%, but why does it feel different? That's one of the interesting things that comes out when you look at the data more closely from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So there's something called the U1, which is what we talk about unemployment. And to be unemployed, technically, and counted in U1, that 5.5%, you have to have been looking for work in the past 4 weeks, but not finding it. What happens if you are one of those people who go out and tries applying for jobs, and gets rejected, and rejected, and rejected? And you go to the bar instead and start drinking, and drinking, and drinking. You are now considered a discouraged worker because you're fed up, you're tired of it. So now you're taken out of the unemployment, but you're in a different category, which is called marginally attached or discouraged workers. There are some who are a category of marginal, those are distracted, but then there's those, the discouraged workers, but the whole category of marginal are those who pop in and out of the labor force. So they might be in, and they find they lose a job, they get discouraged and don't look again, then they come back and start trying it again. They're not counted in the official statistics. But you also have those which are considered part-time for economic reasons. These are people who now are starting to do things like Uber or Lyft, or find that they have an employer who said, we really would love to give you a 40-hour week job, but we really can't afford to pay you 40 hours. Can you work 30 instead? So technically, you still have a job, but you're not working the full-time job you wanted to have. These people are considered part-time for economic reasons. If you look at that statistic, the unemployment rate now goes to about 11%. That's basically double the 5.5. That's how the fact or fiction changes the narrative. That's how some people say we have a great economy right now, very low unemployment. Everyone can get a job that wants it. And you look around and see people talking in the paper saying it's hard to get a job, I can't find a job, I'm forced to do Uber, I need to make ends meet. Where's the disconnect? The disconnect is that we're not having full employment for those who want it. So we're really getting about 11%. What does that mean for you, obviously? We need to change something before you guys graduate and go out and get jobs. And it's not just unemployment that matters in this context of the different rates, it's also something called the unemployment to population ratio. This is the percentage of people between 16 and say 65, male and female, that are working. Now, if I win the lottery tomorrow and decide I don't want to work anymore, you may not care that I'm not working because I basically became a millionaire through the lottery. But what if I get discouraged and drop out, or I feel like I'm disabled and don't want to work? What happens? You see a giant drop off here at the start of the 2007-2008 recession. A lot of people pulled out of the labor force. Part of that was because they got laid off. Part were discouraged they couldn't find work. Some, like the baby boomers who are now retiring, got very close to retirement age, lost their job, and said, it's not worth me going back and getting retraining. I'm 55 years old, I'm 57, I'm going to drop out. But that recession was 2007-2008. That's 8 years ago. The trend line has not been going up very rapidly. In fact, the question now is, are we in a new normal where this is now the employment to population ratio? And what does that mean for us going forward? The reason this is important for you to consider is that we have a lot of regulation, we have a lot of stagnant growth, and we have a lot of people who aren't employed as much as they want to be. And it's not as rosy as it looks with a 5.5% unemployment rate. It's actually a lot worse. We need to figure out what's going on and try to get people back into jobs and employment, get companies to invest more, so we get people who have jobs and can go out and grow the economy. But this could be the new normal. If we don't get it back up to above 62%, we're in trouble. So that's sort of the first one. The second one deals with healthcare, which is bending the curve and controlling the cost of inflation of healthcare is enough. You've heard a lot of stories about healthcare costs are going up rapidly. Costs of drugs are going up, prices to see doctors are going up, the cost of insurance is going up. You've probably heard stories about insurance companies leaving the exchange in certain markets. Why should you care about this? You guys are all in school, you have insurance to the university. Why should you care about the cost of healthcare? It's going to skyrocket. And what happens as the cost goes up? What happens to you?
Probably won't be covered, or it's going to be really tough to pay your bills.
So one is you could lose coverage, or you'll basically be getting less for the more money you're paying. Or it's something called crowd out. If you're paying more money for insurance, that's less money you have for rent or for cars or vacations. But it also affects the government. Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and the exchange markets. If the dollar prices goes up, that's money that can't go for subsidizing, say, education or infrastructure, transportation, defense. It's a crowd out issue. For a while, there was this, when the Obama administration started, the idea was bend the curve. So there's inflation, which you've heard about, which inflation is about 2% a year, but healthcare inflation. Healthcare alone is growing between 4 and 5% a year, sometimes 6%. It was going higher than the actual economy was increasing. And the question was why? Could you bend the curve and bring that back down? And so a lot of economists said, if we can just control that and bring the growth of healthcare in line with the growth of the economy, then everything's fine again. Well, that's not necessarily the case. So this is numbers from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They're the ones who run Medicare and Medicaid and the Department of Health and Human Services. And you have the share of GDP that is going to these two expenditures. The blue line is what's called current law. It's what the law specifies. But the red one is called the illustrative alternative fiscal scenario. So you guys have probably heard of the United States Congress. And Congress always does what they say they're going to do, right? So Congress passes laws that sometimes say we're going to increase benefit cuts for healthcare. There was something called the Doc Fix a while back, which was supposed to reduce the payments paid to physicians under Medicare. And each year, Congress never let the cut go into place. They kept letting it go forward and forward. Under current law, those things are supposed to happen to control healthcare. But under reality, politics gets in the way. And that's the alternative fiscal scenario. So what you see is even under a current law, if we could actually hold costs down by doing what we said we're going to do, we're still getting to the point where healthcare costs for Medicare and Medicaid are going to be 6% of our gross domestic product. If we keep doing what we're doing now, and Congress not following through on their promises, we're going to get to the point where we're 9 or 10%. Have you guys heard of something called the IPAB, the Independent Payment Advisory Board? So the IPAB was created as part of the Affordable Care Act to control costs. The idea is that there would be an independent body, I think it's 16 people, who would be appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and they had limited authority to look at healthcare costs. And if healthcare costs got out of whack in certain areas from Medicare, they could reduce them, like payments and other things. That was passed in the Affordable Care Act, which is several years ago. How many members do you think have been appointed to the Independent Payment Advisory Board? Zero. Not one. In 2017, the law stipulates, because of healthcare costs have been going up, that the IPAB now has to make decisions on cost controls. How does a board that does not have any members make decisions under the law? I don't know either. So you now have a law that says you must do this, but there's no people to do what the law says they're going to do. And no one wants to basically be on the IPAB or put people forward because they know it's going to cause political problems with constituents, which is why healthcare costs right now are continuing to grow, and we're not able to actually bring them back in line. This becomes important when we start thinking about the programs themselves. This is Medicare costs. So this is in 2015 dollars. So the dollars are all the same, so you can compare apples to apples. In 1975, there were 24.9 million people on Medicare. And Medicare is the program we have for those who are retirees, 65 and older, and some that are disabled as well. The average cost in 2015 dollars was $2,900 per person, about $3,000. Today, we have 55.3 million people. This is the baby boomers that are going. And the cost is almost $12,000 per person. As we go forward in 2040, we're going to have almost 90 million people on Medicare. The average cost per enrollee will be about $22,000. So it's not just the cost that's going up, but it's also the people that are being covered. And that creates a huge fiscal drain. And why is that important for you? Because the more money that we basically have going to seniors means less money that goes for people who are college age. This is why you've heard before about the whole idea of rocking the vote, getting out to vote. What is the biggest voting bloc we have in this country? Older people, seniors. What's the smallest voting bloc by age? College students. Who wins out in an election when it comes to getting money? Seniors. Who gets screwed? Yeah. What do you need to do with this coming election? Vote. This is why it's important for you. Because if this doesn't change, the resources that are going for the elderly will continue. And I'm not saying they shouldn't get some resources, but it's opportunity costs. Economics is a study of scarce resources and choices. Right now, a lot of resources are going for the old and healthcare, and a lot less are going for education, infrastructure, transportation, et cetera. This is Medicare. There's another program called Medicaid. Medicaid is basically what we do for the poor. It's a federal program, but it's run by the states. So the states run it and the federal government helps match with dollars. So this chart looks at federal matching, state and federal spending together. And you'll see the curve is going up to the point where in 2081, it's basically going to be bankrupt. We're not even sure we can afford something like this. But under the Affordable Care Act, we expanded Medicaid for some states that took an enhanced match for new enrollees to cover certain people that weren't getting coverage before. The states get a certain percentage increase in the match, but it only lasts for a few years and it goes away. That's why some states like Texas and Virginia opted not to expand, because there was money for a few years, but nothing afterwards, leaving the fiscal bill to the states. And so only 20-some states expanded, the rest didn't, and now you have this dichotomy with what happens. And we're going to see for the states that expanded where the money's going to come from in a few years, whether they're going to be able to afford it or not. But this is the trajectory for Medicaid. So now you have Medicaid and Medicare, two major government health care programs that are really driving expenditures. They're going to pull resources from other areas as well. So we got to do more than just bend the curve is the point. We got to control access in some ways, benefits covered, and also the costs that we're providing. Third one, Social Security is not adding to the deficit. You kind of hear this all the time. Social Security's got a trust fund, it's paying benefits, it's fine, don't worry about it. Why should you guys care about Social Security?
Might not be there when you need it.
So it might not be there when you need it. If you look back at the last major reform we had, it was 1983. Who here was born after 1983? Whew. All right, so the next major reform that happens will probably mirror the 83 reform. In 1983, what they did is a series of benefit cuts and tax increases. But the benefit cuts were put in place over a long period of time, meaning the retirement age was increased. It wasn't increased for those who were on benefits. It was increased for those who were not yet born or not yet working. So when the retirement age was 65, it is now 67 for someone like me, and I'm 45 years old. So now imagine we have a grand bargain that happens in a few years. And are we going to cut benefits for current retirees politically? Probably not. Who are we going to raise the retirement age for? You guys. And who are we going to put tax increases on? You guys. So again, you're looking at paying more for health care. You're also looking for paying more for Social Security benefits that you might not get anything from, or it might just be getting paid for the promises that are currently being made, but not for enhanced benefits. So the costs are going up. This comes out of your ability to pay for housing, for cars, for vacation, and in some ways it raises the cost of employment, which makes it harder for you to get a job. But we need to do something because right now we're running deficits. So back when they did the 83 reforms, they raised the payroll taxes as well. That created a surplus for Social Security. Now what that means is that the payroll taxes coming in were more than the benefits going out, and there was excess money. By law, Social Security could not just stick it in a bank. They couldn't buy stock in Apple or Google. They had to buy treasury bonds. They basically had to take one pocket from the left and put it in the right pocket. So the federal government basically got money from Social Security. The excess payroll taxes went to the federal government. They borrowed less from China, Japan, and from us, and they spent it. So it's gone. Now, the trust fund is technically a real asset to the Social Security Administration, just like it would be if you were a pension fund. They're treasury bonds. So if they go to Treasury and say, here, I want money, Treasury's got to give them money. But where does Treasury get that money to give Social Security when they go redeem the bonds? Where does it come from? They have to borrow it. From who? China, Japan, or they raise taxes for it. So it wasn't like the money went into a real bank account or real assets that the government could draw upon. It was basically an accounting gimmick. So right now, when we start drawing from it, because right now we're running cash flow deficits, payroll taxes alone are not enough to cover benefits, so we're drawing from the trust funds. And so that money is coming from other sort of sources, China, Japan, other borrowing. That increases our borrowing costs overall. And again, at some point, it runs out. Right now, the Social Security trust funds are scheduled to be depleted in 2034. There are two trust funds. There's one for disability and one for retirement. We're all usually familiar with the retirement one, but you're also covered for disability. If you have enough quarters of coverage where you've worked and you become disabled, Social Security will give you a benefit until you retire that covers your inability to work. So there's two trust funds. Combined, they become depleted in 2034, but legally they're separate. Conventionally, we talk about them together. The disability trust fund is supposed to be expired in 2023, the retirement one in 2035. Congress extended the life of the disability trust fund. It was actually supposed to go depleted 2016 last year. If you remember the whole fiscal problems we were having, the fiscal deals, one of that became a payroll tax reallocation. So right now there's 12.4% of payroll taxes goes for Social Security if you're working. 6.2 for the employer, 6.2 from the employee, the worker. Part of that goes to disability. They shifted the allocation. They basically took from Paul to pay Peter, took from the retirement program to pay for the disability program to give it a few years boost. Basically, they kicked the can down the road. Do you think we're going to solve the Social Security funding crisis before we hit 2034? No. I don't think so either. What does it take for Congress to act? It takes a crisis. There's the crisis. But the longer we wait, the more drastic the magnitude has to be for the changes, whether they're benefit cuts, tax increases, or a combination of the two. And right now, it does add to the deficit. So we're continuing to expand the deficit because when we go, Social Security goes to the Treasury and says, I need to redeem these, Treasury goes out to the public market and says, give us money, we borrow more money. That adds to the deficit. This is why you should care today about the benefits, because if we're going to have tax increases or benefit cuts, you need to do them earlier as opposed to later. This one hits you right in your wallet right now. The next fiscal crisis will be a student loan crisis. Who here is taking out student loans to go to school? A few of you are. There is a rhetoric going on now that after the housing crisis in 2007-8, the next one that's going to be piled up is the student loan crisis. Is that fact or fiction? What does it feel like to you? Who here thinks their student loans are going to be manageable and you're not worried about it? 2.5. Who's here is concerned about their potential student loan liabilities? A few more hands. Student loans are now our highest outstanding debt besides primary mortgages. So housing mortgages is still the most, but now you have student loans. There are $1.3 trillion outstanding of student loan debt, higher than the outstanding balances for auto loans, higher than credit card balances for the United States, and higher than what's called a HELOC. These are a home equity line of credit. So if you own a home and you get a second mortgage on it, it's higher than that too. So the rhetoric right now is there's $1.3 trillion of student loan out there. How are we going to be able to repay it? Need jobs for it. This feeds into the rhetoric that the next crisis is a student loan crisis. If you dissect the data a little bit, what you start seeing is that the majority of the balance basically is less than $25,000. So 38.8% of borrowers have less than $10,000 of balance. 28.5 have between 10 and 25,000. Only a small sliver. So 0.8% have $200,000 or more. 1% has $150,000 to $200,000, and then 2.4, 100 or 150. Who do you think is taking that kind of loan balance out? What kind of people are students? Med students, law students, et cetera. If they get jobs, they can pay it back. If they don't get jobs, they're going to get stuck. This is why you've heard of a crisis when looking at law schools. Law schools have had a hard time placing lawyers lately. And so they come out of school with $150,000 to $200,000 of debt. So if you're thinking about going to law school, what you need to start thinking about, they can't get placements. They can't get those high-paying jobs in firms they were expecting before. And now you have a small sliver that could be basically looking at default for student loans. But for the vast majority, they're in some ways manageable. So does that mean we have a crisis or no crisis? Who here studies economics? All right, you know what the number one answer in economics is? When someone asks you a question? It depends. Is there a student loan crisis? It depends. Depends on who you are, where you've gotten the money from, what field you went into, and whether or not you can get a job to pay for it. That's the really important key with this. Is it really depends on what area we're targeting and who we're targeting for. Because one of the things you've been hearing, if you also listen to the debate on this, is there are some university presidents who have gone out and said that college is now the most affordable it's ever been in your lifetime. I heard people laugh already. Why could someone say college is more affordable than ever before? Anyone here ever tried to go buy a car? And the dealer says, we can make sure you can afford it? How do they make sure you can afford it? What kind of loans? What do they do to the loan to make it more affordable?
They lower the interest rate.
They
keep paying for a lot longer.
Bingo. You can lower the rate, or you can extend the duration of payments. Auto loans used to be paid in cash. Then there was a 2-year loan, 3-year loan, 4-year, 5-year. You know what the majority of loans are now for car loans, for new cars? 7-year loans. The plurality is 7 years. Can you imagine going now and getting a new car and having a 7-year loan? But they didn't have 30-year mortgages before. Housing prices are going up. Pretty soon we're probably going to have a 40-year mortgage. What this data shows is that we're now seeing an extension where people who are 60 plus still have some loan balances when they get to retirement. What happens when you're 60 plus and you're still paying student loans? What does that mean you have less money for? Retirement, everything else. Healthcare, rent if your house isn't paid off. What this also does, and we're seeing in the data, is if you have student loans that continue further, say into your 30s or even 40s, what might you put off doing that people have done in previous generations by the time they're 40? Buying a house, getting married, having kids. So we're starting to see now in some ways student loan being correlated with people putting off marriage, buying a house, and having children. It's changing in some ways because of this. So now when you think about student loan debt, is there a crisis? It depends. It is definitely changing the nature of what we look at with demographics and what that means for housing markets and job markets and retirement. If people can't pay off their student loans, they're not going to save for retirement. They can't save for retirement, it's going to be a bigger drain on Social Security. So all these things feed in, and that's why it's important for you to get engaged now, because if we don't make changes soon, the magnitude just increases over time. Number 5, we can balance the budget just by cutting foreign aid, fraud, waste, and abuse. One of my all-time favorites. You still hear a lot of Republicans say, we just get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, we're fine. Some people say we can expand the program if we just get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse. Well, that's not necessarily true, as you guys know. We now have less than a $1 trillion deficit. After the 2007-8 recession, we had a $1.1 to $1.2 trillion deficit, meaning we were short $1 trillion in 1 year. We've whittled it down to $600 billion or so. I was waiting for someone to laugh. It's going back up to $1 trillion. But what I wanted to show you is what happens to deficit reduction if we just cancel certain things. So the Republicans have always said we hate the National Endowment for the Arts. Let's cancel it. Fraud, waste, and abuse, right? We'll balance the budget. Well, it doesn't do anything. They have a $133 million annual budget. That does not do anything for a $616 billion deficit. Let's disallow congressional earmarks. We're talking about earmarks. Well, that takes out a little bit. You can cut out maybe $10 billion from earmarks. That's maybe fraud, waste, and abuse. Doesn't get you all the way there. Foreign aid doesn't get you much either. Now, if we actually stopped Social Security checks for all retirees, that would do it. How well is that going to go over? None. Yeah, nothing. All the old folk are going to come get me. They're going to come after if we're even suggesting it. But we really can't do some of this. That would actually give us a surplus. But we can't just look at fraud, waste, and abuse. There are programs that cost a lot, and we have to figure out how to do it. We'll have questions afterwards, so definitely hold on, unless there's something on this one.
Well, Kevin Williamson, a couple days ago in National Review, had a piece about Medicaid fraud specifically, and how that's the one big entitlement program that you actually could take a serious chunk out of it.
So the question was, can we do something with Medicaid
Right.
improper payment rates? So the one beauty of being an economist who does a lot of talks is I come prepared. And it's actually a good question to get into because it feeds right in with this. There is something called improper payment rates. So improper payments are not just fraud, but it could be things that are technically problems in which maybe someone didn't understand what they're eligible for, so they misdiagnosed something, or someone claims a benefit they didn't know they were qualified for and they get paid less or more. It could be the agency screwing up. The IRS sometimes makes mistakes when you file your tax return and you get less or more than you should. They're all called improper payments. For Medicare, so not Medicaid, but Medicare is actually the highest one, has a 10% improper payment rates. We could probably reduce Medicare by $36 billion. How far is that going to get you on 616? A little bit, but not a lot. That's one of the biggest ones. The rest of them are all lower dollar values. The highest error rate is actually the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC we give for those who basically are working and it's a subsidy for working. It has a 24% improper payment rate, but that amounts to $14.5 billion. So this is where it still makes a difference. But even by cutting all these out that I have here, and I'm happy to show this to you afterwards if you want to see it, you're basically only making a slight dent in the deficit. So we really do need to do it because it's also a part of good government. How can I go and tell the American people I want to expand government services if I can't actually prevent the fraud and waste that we have in the current program? But it's not going to solve the problem. We need to do it because it's a good thing to do. We should have proper payments, but it's not going to solve the deficit. I think that's the point to get home here. Number 6, we can balance the budget without tax. We can't balance the budget without tax increases. There is a line out there that because we spend so much money and people demand so many services, that the only way we're actually going to be able to pay for it is to raise taxes. Now, you can raise taxes, you can cut spending, or you can do a combination of both. But you have some on the political field right now in the campaign saying we have to raise taxes to pay for government. This is just my cheap and dirty way, and this is why I do not get paid to do charts, but I'll just show you. Start at the far left, 2015. The bottom dot is the amount of money we're bringing in revenues. The top dot is what we spend. That gap is the deficit. Take the top lines and go forward. That's what happens if we basically either reduce spending by 1%, that's the bottom blue line, hold spending constant, allow for a 1% increase, or even a 2% increase when it comes to spending. The bottom lines going up to the top right corner are revenues. So if we just hold revenues to the economy, right now there's a long-term average of 18% of GDP, and that's what the Congressional Budget Office forecasts we're going to get going forward. Doesn't require tax changes, doesn't require tax cuts. It's just saying keep the status quo we have today, and if we do that, can we balance the budget by even allowing the government to grow 2% a year? When you start seeing as you can. But what's the challenge? Does it seem hard to control your own spending and say, I want us to keep spending to 2% a year increases? What are the biggest drivers we've been talking about for growth in government right now? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, which are growing 6% a year. So we've been having some government agencies that have had spending freezes, we've had some that have had cuts, but we're still seeing deficits because we can't control the big three, which is Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. We have to do that. But if we could hold the entire government spending to 2% a year for 10 years and not do anything on the tax side, no tax cuts, no tax increases, we could actually balance the budget. And that's not expanding the economy. So the Congressional Budget Office assumes we're going to grow at 2% real per year the next 10 years. That's not a lot. If we get 2.5%, 3.5%, we could probably even get a surplus. But again, we have to hold government spending down regardless. 7, one of my favorites, the debt isn't a problem. Dick Cheney went from being one of my famous vice presidents to one of my least favorite vice presidents when he said deficits and debt don't matter. They do matter. Debt does matter. And it is a problem. You've seen the last few years, we've had fiscal cliffs, we've had debt ceiling debates, we've had debt ceiling drama that have basically come down to closing the government. We've gone up this cliff, the fiscal cliff. But what does debt and deficits mean for us? And what does it mean for you? This is the debt picture right now as we stand in 2021. There's what's called debt held by the public and gross debt. Public debt is the debt that the Treasury sells to you, me, pension funds, China, Japan, foreign governments, and banks hold it. The gross debt, the difference between public debt and gross debt, is intergovernmental. That's the Social Security trust funds, and that's the Medicare trust funds. But at some point, again, when those two agencies go to Treasury and say, I need this money back, it becomes public debt anyway. So in some ways, the gross debt's what's important. We now basically have debt of $19 trillion. Our economy is $18.1 trillion. So if we all worked for a year and didn't spend any money, but just paid off debt, we'd still be $1 trillion short. Now, I have a line drawn at 90% of GDP. A few years ago, there's some economists, Reinhardt and Rogoff, who said that 90% of GDP, you start seeing countries have economic depressions, or economic growth slows because of it. There was a grad student did an analysis of their data and found they made a spreadsheet error. And depending on how you clump the data together, you got different results. But what we're starting to see, though, is that no matter what level you put up there, when debt gets too high, it starts crowding out and causing economic growth problems. Think Greece. Why did Greece have such problems with their debt? Because they basically were paying so much money in debt repayment and interest, they couldn't afford to pay for anything else. At some point, our debt becomes so large, I'm not sure what that number is, but it becomes so large that our debt service payments take away from our ability to pay for healthcare, for education, for infrastructure, and everything else. It means you have to pay more in tax dollars to pay off debt for spending we've already done and not for investments we want to make going forward. That's why it's so important. But again, this is just debt held by the public is money we've borrowed, we've already paid for stuff. That pink line, giving you gross debt, is the money that Social Security basically is owed, that the government's already spent, but we got to pay back to Social Security. What we're not counting, though, is the unfunded liabilities we promised going forward. That's called fiscal gap. Now, again, this is about 19 trillion. The fiscal gap right now stands at about $201 trillion. What that means is if you go forward and look at all the promised benefits we have for Social Security, for Medicare, for pension funds the government's actually liable for, we don't have the revenues to pay for it, we're short $201 trillion today. That's what we would need to be solvent. So this is the magnitude of the problem we're facing and why the debt's important. Because again, if we ignore the debt and it gets so large, it's going to crowd out the ability for us to do anything we want to do on other types of activities, whether it's pay for student loans, pay lower tuition costs, have more roads, infrastructure, defense, agriculture, energy, transportation policy. It's all going to be crowded out because of our payments we're going to have in the debt. To give you an idea, for every 1 percentage point increase in the interest rate, so 100 basis points, it adds right now about $1.3 trillion over 10 years to our interest payments. And we're paying really low interest rates right now. So do you guys know what the interest rates are right now for T-bills?
0.25%.
Well, so if you're, that's the real rate, but you're somewhere lower than 2. What were they back in the 1980s? 20%. The long-term average is about 8.5. So do you think 2% is going to last forever? I don't either, but I don't know when it's going to get back up there, but at some point it's going to. And that leads to the problem because of low interest rates. Should we borrow more money? So Paul Krugman, Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, have said because we are in this really strange environment where we have interest rates that are 2% or lower, some banks are now giving out negative yields. People are paying them to hold their money, which is the weirdest thing in the world. Why don't we borrow more money, because it's cheap, and spend it on infrastructure, or spend it on students to go back to school, or do something else with it? Why don't we borrow more money and stimulate the economy? This is a big thing that's now going forward, and you see in some of the campaigns. Right now, this is a split of percent of GDP that's going for other spending, Social Security, our major healthcare programs, so Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act exchanges. And that top sliver at 2016 is net interest. This right now assumes that interest rates stay between 2 and 3.5%. But look at how much when we get to 2044, that interest is increasing. Now, what is one of the things you find that happens with debt? So if you save money, what do a lot of the financial advisors tell you to do when you save money? Do you want to start earlier or later? Earlier. Why do you want to start earlier?
So you can accumulate more.
Compounding. Compounding is great for savers. What does it do for debtors? Puts them further in debt because the magnitude of the debt grows for the same reason. So what we now have is a problem where we have crowding out in debt. Back in 1970, there's something called mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is sort of like on autopilot. It's Social Security, it's Medicare, it's Medicaid. It happens automatically unless the Congress takes action to change it through law and the president signs it. Unlike the appropriations bills for defense, education, agriculture, NEA, those things have to be apportioned and appropriated every year. Back in 1970, 38% of spending was mandatory. and that includes net interest. 2016, it's now 69%, and you can see net interest is only 6%. But in 2040, it's projected that mandatory spending will be 81%, and of that, 20% will be on interest. Now, this is important for two reasons. One is the fiscal crowd-out that happens. Again, if so much money is going for mandatory spending, that's less that can go for discretionary. Again, education, infrastructure, transportation, et cetera. But it also is an issue for governance. One of the things that when I was on Capitol Hill, you still had members of Congress who would literally break bread on Saturday or Sunday mornings, have meetings, and then go to work on Monday morning and try to compromise. What do you see happening today? They go and make fun of each other and they vilify on the TV talk shows on Sunday, and they go to work on Monday and do the exact same thing. There's no compromise. Part of that is because of this occurrence. When you have a discretionary budget, those are the things that Congress goes and they try to negotiate for, because that's what they can do every year. Now, think about a pack of hungry dogs. If you take food away from the hungry dogs, do they get nicer or meaner? They get meaner. What happens if you start taking away budget resources from Congress? Do you think they get nicer or meaner? Meaner. The stakes are higher. So they start fighting more and more. So imagine the partisanship we have today. What's that going to look like in 2040? We have a really partisan Congress right now, which sort of then reflects and works down to the people. In some ways, getting our fiscal house in order is more than just a fiscal issue. It's a public discourse and governance issue, and that's where we're going. To take it a little bit further out than 2040, when we get to 2082, net interest will be 50 cents on every dollar. Imagine if you were paying 50 cents, half of your entire budget was going to pay interest, not even paying off the debt, but just paying interest. This is why you have to care. Because if it's not for you, it's for your kids. But we're getting to the point where interest is going to start crowding out our ability to do anything because they're trying to service debt. This is Greece. This is why Greece collapsed. Because everyone was saying, you still owe us money, and you can't even make interest payments. How am I going to make interest payments and then pay to keep the lights on, keep government paychecks going, have education funding, have healthcare funding, have Social Security funding, agriculture funding, defense funding? I can't do it. It crowds it all out. So something has to change, and the earlier we do it, the better. 9, 2 more to go. You've heard a lot of rhetoric now, the rich don't pay their fair share. Who here thinks the rich don't pay their fair share? All right, I got 1, 2, so we're going to go with the report. We're going to go with the reporter in the back because he's now going to play. This is what you get for raising your hand. It's a classroom. Think about just federal taxes. So Texas does not have state income tax, so you can forget about it anyway. Just think about the 1040, and think about the people who file taxes, so those who are working, and take your top 1% that you hear are not paying their fair share. Of all the federal income taxes we collect in a year that's reported on a 1090 or a 1040, what percentage of the 100% do you think the top 1% pay?
Less than 30?
Less than 30%.
I want to say like 30, 38 maybe.
38, someone's going higher? 55. So 1% is paying for half of everything. So this comes to the idea of what's fair share. So what you see is the top 1% is about 37, 38%, right in the butt. So 1% of taxpayers are basically giving 38% of the revenue. The bottom half is 2.8%. Top 5, 58%. Top 10, that's sort of a nice place to be in, right? If you're a top 10, you're doing pretty well in this country. The top 10% are paying 70%. Is that unfair? Is that fair? Is that right? Is that wrong? Should we increase it? Fairness is in the eye of the beholder, right? What's fair to one might not be fair to another. But one way of fairness as a judge is to benchmark it. This could be fair in one way if this is the percentage of adjusted gross income they have. So you hear is that the rich aren't paying their fair share because they have so much money that they're not paying taxes on the money they have, which would imply that their adjusted gross income share is higher than their tax share. What do you think now if you look at income? So we get income from working, from capital gains and dividends, from farm income. If you run an Airbnb, you get income from that. Put it all in there. It's called adjusted gross income. What share of 100% of all U.S. adjusted gross income do you think the top 1% has? And this is not wealth, so it's income.
How much?
How much? Yeah, all the cash that's coming in.
I think they're getting at least 40%.
19.
Oh, well, okay.
This is where perception becomes reality. There's an old, so I took a law class once, and I was told that possession is 9/10 of the law. If you have something, 90% of it means it's yours, and someone's got to prove the other 10th that it's not. They want to take it away. In politics and policy, perception is 9/10 reality. A lot of people think that the rich have a lot more income, because this is not wealth, this is income, than is technically known or reported. And so it skews our perception of discussion when it comes to tax policy debates and what's not the fair share. Now I can see where you're going with the next question, so I'm going to ask you anyway. Thinking about a job, income earned, how much money do you think you need to have earned in a year to be in the top 1%? Yeah. So 500,000, be in the top 1%. How much to be in the top 10? We all kind of agree the top 10 is a good place to be. So 500,000 is top 1, 200. Here's the cash income breakout for 2007, 9, and 13. You can just stick with 13. In the top 1%, you need $428,000, so close to the 500. To be in the top 10%, it's $127,700. Now, this is tax return data, which means it also includes married couples. If you go back 8 years ago, when candidate Obama was running for the presidential nomination for the Democratic Party, who was his primary rival? In the Democratic primary? Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton came out and said that she thought rich meant you had $200,000 a year or more, which meant you were basically talking about even higher than the top 10%. The problem is, you think about New York City, if you're making $200,000 a year, do you think you're rich in New York City? What do you think a public school teacher makes in New York City, on average? $70,000 to $80,000. What do you think a firefighter in New York makes, especially after 9/11? So imagine those two get married. They're now making $150,000, $170,000. Guess what? They're in the top 10%. Hillary Clinton was calling them rich and wanted to raise their taxes. And it didn't go over very well. Candidate Obama, and also now President Obama, has said he has rich is a different category. What does he consider rich to be? Do you know? He goes with $250,000. $200,000 single, $250,000 married. Do you guys know who Senator Chuck Schumer is? Very liberal senator from the state of New York. Do you know what his definition of rich is for taxpayers? $1 million. He knows where his votes come from, so he raised the level. But the point I'm making here is that we basically have a tax system which taxes a small group as a percentage, a very large share. That may or may not be fair. I'm not going with that. But the perception is that they're not paying their fair share, and they're all loaded. And that's not really the case. But let's go a little bit differently. Let's talk about millionaires, because we all know we're going to be millionaires someday. And we're all going to get there. And what share of that 100% again do you think just millionaires pay? %. So if you're a millionaire on a tax return, you're paying basically a quarter of federal income taxes that are coming in. Now that may or may not be right, it may be wrong, but there are basically 345,000 returns that said they were millionaires. And you can see in time how it dropped off. 2007 was the peak. What happened after 2007? The recession. And it basically started off as a financial crash. So we lost a lot of millionaires. I've always been joking the best way to balance the budget is we need more millionaires, because they'll obviously pay more taxes. But this is it's somewhat of a joke, but this is the idea of why it's important, because we think about trying to tax people. There are only so many ultra-rich billionaires and millionaires out there. Talk about 345,000. The rest of it's us. When you go out and get a job as a lawyer or a doctor or as a journalist and you get married, you're in the top 10%. That's where the money is. Do you guys want to pay more taxes? The politicians say we're just taxing the rich, but guess what? That's you. So we have to figure out a way to basically grow the economy, grow the share of people that really are rich and they pay more, but also realize that if we want more services, we're the ones who are going to have to pay for it. And that's sort of the fact behind the fiction. The last thing, and then I'll open up for questions. This one always gets me. It's numbers, numbers, numbers. Context doesn't matter. So when I started off in Washington, D.C., literally millions were important. And then it became billions. All of a sudden, millions didn't matter. And something that says, someone goes and says, we have $500 million. That sounds a lot worse than saying you have $500 million, even though they're the exact same. But it's a half. What does it matter then? So now you're talking about billions and billions, and now we're getting to the point where we're talking about trillions, right? $19 trillion is the gross national debt, $201 trillion fiscal gap, trust fund balances, Social Security, Medicaid. Social Security now spends $792 billion a year. Medicare and Medicaid combined spent over $1 trillion. What does that mean? What does $1 trillion look like? Anyone here have $1 trillion in their wallet? Just curious? Okay, so I want to give you an idea of what we're talking about, though, because it matters. So we've heard all these hundreds of billions, trillions, but what does it mean? Everyone here's got a Ben Franklin in their wallet, right? A $100 bill? Yes, no? Has everyone who's seen a $100 bill, held it and smelled it and tried to steal it? Okay. Imagine a $100 bill. This is what $10,000 looks like if you had it in a stack. It's basically a half-inch thick. I could put it right in my coat pocket. You wouldn't know I have it. Easy to carry around $10,000 of hundreds. Chump change. Let's go up. $1 million. That's what $1 million looks like in $100 bills. Your bag, you could hold $1 million in there. Backpack, you might have $1 million in there. We're going to check you on the way out because I need to pay for the deficit. You could be walking out with $1 million in hundreds and I wouldn't know it because it'll fit in a knapsack. That's just $1 million. All right, big deal. Now we're still talking chump change. Here is what 100 million looks like. So $100 million in $100 bills is now a pallet. This is where you see the crate come up, put the forks in and carry around. That's what $100 million looks like. And there's a guy my size standing next to him. That's $1 billion. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we've got 10 of those pallets, and that would fill up this room. So we could fill up basically this room with $1 billion in $100 bills. That's pretty decent, right? We could live off that for a few months. We could be pretty much all right. But that's just a chump change. Now, $1 trillion. That's something we've been hearing so much about. We're $1 trillion of deficits, $1 trillion in debt. A trillion is a million. It's 1,000 billion. It's a 1 followed by 12 zeros, and it looks like this. Now you'll notice that guy my size in the far left corner. So it's 2 stacked, and it basically takes up more than a football field. That's $1 trillion in $100 bills. And we throw this number around so casually as if we're talking about buying dinner at McDonald's. It's real money. It's really significant. It's what a lot of things are now starting to cost. And how do we pay for this when we basically have a mental image that $1 trillion basically means nothing? And it becomes important for the policy circles because if you remember just a few years ago, we had $1 trillion deficit, $1 trillion deficit. And this was the debt ceiling. The Republicans didn't want to raise it. The Democrats did. And we had basically this fiscal cliff issue. I don't know if you remember, but there was a really unique thing that somebody found. The United States Treasury has the authority to mint commemorative coins of any value. Now, the debt ceiling is the amount of money you can borrow. But what happens if you print money? So someone suggested that the United States Treasury print a $1 trillion platinum coin. Print it, go to the Federal Reserve and say, here. And that would be deposited in the Treasury's bank account. There would be no need to raise the debt ceiling because now they basically have $1 trillion in the bank account, and they could fund the government for a few more months. By the way, we spend about $3.5 trillion a year. This would get us through about 3 months. That was the idea. And people are like, this is ridiculous. It became a joke. We started calling it the Obama buck because President Obama was thinking about suggesting it as a ploy to say to Republicans, raise the debt ceiling or I'm going to print $1 trillion coin and put it in the bank, and we're just going to subvert the United States Congress in the first place. And they ended up becoming a deal. But this becomes important because what happens if we start playing gimmicks with money? What if we start printing $1 trillion coin and do it again next year? What does that do to the money supply? Inflation. And why is that important? Because why stop at $1 trillion? How about $100 trillion? So what I've been trying to tell my wife now is that I don't want to work anymore. Oops, I dropped my mic. And I don't think I should because I actually own a $100 trillion bill. So people, if you want to get rich, see me after class. But what do you think this is actually worth? Because this happened at a time where really, this is Zimbabwe, where inflation was rampant. They started off with a $1 billion note, $5 billion note, $50 billion, $100 billion, $500 billion, $1 trillion. When they hit $1 trillion, that was like, you guys are nuts. But now you've got a $100 trillion. Remember that photo I showed you of the whole football field? That's $1 trillion. I've now got 100 of them right here in my pocket. What do you think this was worth at the height when they introduced it in US dollars? 33 cents. It took 300 trillion Zimbabwe dollars to make a US dollar. Now, what is this worth today? Funny question. Technically, it's worth less than the paper. If you go to the British Museum has a bunch of these Zimbabwe bills on a wall, and the note is it costs more to print this on paper than the dollars are worth. However, if you're an economics professor who's trying to get some sort of prop for a talk, it's about 20 bucks on Amazon or eBay. So prices are relative. So with that, I'll take any questions you have. Thank you. So there's something, the question is, can we basically have tax cuts that lead to more economic growth? And there's something called dynamic scoring. So the idea is if you look at static scoring, which is what some forecasting and budget agencies do, the idea is if I have $100 out there and I tax 10%, I get $10. If I raise the tax rate to 50%, I now get 50. That's a static score. What happens in the real world if I start taxing you at 50%? You work less, or maybe you don't work at all. If I go to 90%, if I said the tax rate was 100%, am I going to get $100 from you? Not going to work. So there's something called the Laffer curve, which says that at 0%, I collect 0 taxes. But at 100%, I also collect 0. And somewhere along the curve is a point in which I maximize revenue without distorting your behavior. And what is that? If you're on the right side of the curve, it means you could lower taxes and actually bring in revenue. If you're on the left side, you can raise taxes and bring in revenue. And there's a big debate now about where we are. For capital gains taxes, the ideal rate's considered about 17, 18%, so we're probably too high. But for labor, it matters. The marginal effect of labor is higher, the elasticity, for women who are second earners than it is for a primary worker, whether they're male or female. Because if you're a second earner, you might say the tax rate's too high, I don't want to go home. But now imagine me, if I'm single, and I've got a house to pay for, a car payment, and student loans, and they raise my taxes. Am I going to stop working? No, I'm just going to complain a lot. But I'll still pay them, and I'll just try to vote for someone who wants to lower the taxes. So the question now is, if we lower them, would I induce people to go back to work and grow the economy? And there is some truth to that, but the question is, where are you? We don't have a high enough marginal tax rate yet that by lowering them, we're going to get that kind of growth, especially the magnitude, say, that Donald Trump wants to bring in. So if you lower the tax rates the way Donald Trump has proposed, would you get more work? Yes. Would you get more revenue? No. Would the growth be enough to offset it? Probably not. A bigger drain right now on us is basically some of the economic effects from regulation and healthcare. One of the reasons why wages have stagnated is that employers are paying for health insurance premiums. So an individual like you as a worker see your wage, what you get in your paycheck, but it doesn't include all the compensation that your employer is paying for pensions and healthcare. If that goes up, your wage stagnates. So total compensation has been going up, but a lot of it's been going for healthcare costs. So when someone says we can grow our way out of it, take it with a grain of salt. But if you raise taxes too much, you do depress work. So the idea is, how do you find the sweet spot among who? In 30 seconds or less. So here's how I will try to make it as simple as possible, knowing it's very complex. If you as an individual have to go pay for something, so you go and you shop around for Starbucks, for a car, the higher the price of the good, the more likely you are to shop around. So you might shop around at different car dealers, right? You might call and say, I'm trying to buy a Toyota Prius. What's the price list? So the guy down the street's giving me a deal. What happens with healthcare? So right now, if you're not paying your healthcare, who's paying for it? It's a third-party payment system. So you don't see the actual cost. When you go to your doctor and you sit there and you say, I've got a hurt, I've got a pain, I've got a rash, do you say, before you tell me, I want to know what you're charging me first? None of us do that. We know insurance is covering it, or we say, guess what? You've got a $10 copay. Oh, for 10 bucks, give me everything. You go buy pharmaceutical drugs, and there's a copay as well, where you're paying either a certain percentage or a set dollar amount. So you just consume more of it. So part of the problem we have is a third-party payment system where the consumer is divorced from the actual price, and that's one of the problems with keeping costs from lowering. There are models now that are trying to induce cost savings, where you can look at an app and see if you can shop around. And now we're getting in the business where we're trying to be unique, because you still might say, well, why should I take my time for this and go on an app and try to find a way to reduce costs if someone else is paying for it? Some insurance companies are now starting a pilot that will pay you if you save money. So for example, the idea is they're saying, we're looking at where you've been going to see your doctor. He's charging us $100 for an MRI. There's a place 2 miles away that charges us 50 bucks. If you go there instead, we'll split the difference with you and give you $25. And so now you're seeing insurance companies try to basically make it up to you if you want to save money because you get a benefit from it. And we're seeing if that's going to work, but it's a small model. So what you find is when you have a bucket of money, prices tend to rise to reach the bucket. A good corollary to this is looking at student tuition prices. So why have student tuition prices been going up so much? Some economists think it's because of the ability of the federal government to offer you loans. So now instead of saying, well, the sticker price has been going up so much because I can keep my student loan payments down, universities have the incentive to raise tuition to basically match the subsidy. The same thing happens with healthcare. If we subsidize something, we basically get more of it, and that raises prices. The other way we're going to control prices on education, tuition, and healthcare is if the consumer actually starts feeling and realizing the actual price of it in the transaction. And that means vouchers. So if the federal government said, instead of giving you a subsidized loan or me subsidizing a university, I'm going to give you a check for $10,000 for tuition. Go shop around. That's a different incentive package than giving the university money and having them compete for you to go to school. So we have to change something like that with healthcare. But just raising a tax to fund it would just raise the prices to match the dollars coming in.